like a Newfoundland kitchen party, and we are having the biggest Newfoundland kitchen party anywhere in Canada. Hey! Oh, and together all around me, there is something you should know. There ain't no place quite like this place, and we get it on the go. So buy your boots up in the corner, hang your jacket from the door. There's certain people in the kitchen, and there's always room for more.
Everybody's, oh, East Coast music. You know, it's great. Where was it? Well, it's always been there. This talent has always existed.
I think Newfoundland, the talent is just incredible. It's the richest musical area in Canada. It's just unmatched.
Well, there'll be music all around you. You should see the way it feels. Come on, off we go now. Hear the tone now to the jigs and reels. Cause somebody's got a fiddle, someone else brought a guitar, and we got Bobby on the squeeze box, got a chair and raise a jar.
I will hear a Newfoundland tune and say, yes, that's a Newfoundland tune. So I think that there is a spirit that surfaces, an expression of us as being Newfoundlanders, of having a certain temperament and a certain character and a certain joie de vivre.
Take English, Irish, French, Scottish cultures, drag them out in the middle of North Atlantic and leave them there to stew for 300 years, and you end up with us crowd.
She's going up.
We're not just talking Newfoundland music. Everybody wrote these songs in this one year, and this is what it's all about. We're talking about a continuum of 400 or 500 years. This was the history of our ancestors. This was our tragedies, our greatest fears, our greatest hopes. And all of these things were written in the words of these songs.
She's the grandest of ladies, and still not that old. She's just gray at the edges, but years do take toll. But she's just as good, boys, as she used to be. Many long years ago, you can take it from me. And her stride's got that rhythm so dark and so bold, it's like primitive thunder, 7 centuries rolled. And lots of good riders, lots of good men, who have stood up beside her, would stand up, they would stand up again. They would stand up again, just to see she's the grandest of ladies.
Hello, I'm Ingrid Fraser. Music has played a role in every part of life in Newfoundland, from work songs in the lumber woods and jigs at a kitchen party to songs that express the politics and pride of a people. In a land ancient, wild, and beautiful, music has been our constant companion. Tonight, the story of the struggle and survival of that music. It's a struggle infused with humor and joy and laced with salt water and sweat.
Come on, ye good people, I'll sing you a song about the poor people, how they get along. They fish in the spring, finish up in the fall, and when it's all over, they've nothing at all. And it's hard, hard times. Here we go.
It began with fish. The 16th century cod fishery spawned a nation here on the eastern edge of North America. Settlers came from England's West Country, and from Wexford, Waterford, Cork, Kilkenny, and Tipperary in Ireland. The French came from Saint-Malo and the Scots from Cape Breton. These transplanted Europeans brought with them their culture, their musical traditions, their songs, and their stories. and a distinct society evolved. Newfoundlanders in the outports depended on each other for their survival. They also looked to each other for a bit of fun and entertainment.
To a party, everyone had to do something. Sing a song, or do a step dance, or recite a poem, or something like that. That everyone had to share in the as they went around the kitchen party, or the kitchen racket, they used to call it at that time. But the older ladies, I was amused by, they'd sit by somewhere and put their hand up under their chin, and they'd diddle the tunes. Now that's what the people used to dance to. And everyone would be out going right to town on it.
One sort of venue, if you like, for the singing of songs has completely disappeared, and that was the haul-up shanties. Some song that had a regular rhythm that everybody could pull at the same time. I've interviewed people who can remember waking up in the early morning and hearing crowds of men singing the same song.
At the turn of the century, Newfoundlanders were singing songs much the same as their ancestors had for 400 years. Ancient ballads, long gone in the old country, were still sung here. And there was a thriving tradition of local song-making. In the 1920s and 30s, Maud Carpeles from England and two Americans, Elizabeth Greenleaf and Grace Mansfield, explored Newfoundland looking for these songs. In the 50s, another American named McEdward Leach hunted songs in Labrador. And Kenneth Peacock, a Canadian, began his monumental collection project on the island. They all published, but for years these books were read almost exclusively by academics. It would take a local businessman named Gerald S. Doyle to bring song collections into homes across the province.
I believe it must have dawned on him that these songs that he was used to hearing and that he heard in people's kitchens, they weren't written down anywhere. They were just, he was hearing them from place to place. And I guess he had the thought of, it might be an idea if I collected some of these in a booklet or a songster. And being the smart merchandiser he always was, he said, I can do that, and I can put some ads in the songster for my products and kill two birds with the one stone. So that was in 1927.
There's a noble fleet of whalers a-sailing from Dundee, manned by British sailors to take them o'er the sea.
That collection so dominates how one thinks about folk song in Newfoundland. The thing that he was interested in were songs that were about Newfoundland, that were from Newfoundland, and talked about topics that were important for Newfoundland.
You need not try me, sons, for we challenged all, both great and small, from Dundee to St. John's.
Doyle's business took him around the island each summer for more than 25 years.
He knew that in certain places there were people who could sing folk songs in the way that he thought they should be sung, in a traditional way. One person in particular was the Stephen John Lewis of Fleur-de-Lis, and he dedicated the second edition, published in 1940, to Stephen John Lewis of Fleur-de-Lis, one of the most gifted singers of Newfoundland songs. And he would have him come aboard the boat, or they'd go up to his kitchen and he'd sit down and sing these songs. And that was where a lot of them came from.
Come on, hit your partner, Sally, to boat. Hit your partner, Sally, down and roll the
think those songs in the Doyle Songbook were influential in schools and kind of in middle-class homes. And then they became very popular after Confederation as representations of Newfoundland. And a lot of the songs got into very widely distributed recordings. And that's one reason why Eyes the By is, practically a symbol of Newfoundland.
And I just lies to everybody, take for she to travel, sure every step that she just takes was a tourney and gravel.
Just like, I felt when I heard John White singing Jack Hincks on the radio that this stuff is, we're not the only place doing this, or I'm not the only person who enjoys this. So just like that, when people saw that book going around, they knew that their songs being made up somewhere else. There's people in other places that have the same sort of experiences that we do. So, in a sense, it's part of all, what ties us together towards helping us develop a sense of what we're all about as Newfoundlanders.
There is one class of men in this country that seldom is mentioned in song.
Gerald S. Doyle was born in Kings Cove at the turn of the century. Another family from that same Bonavista Bay community had a strong interest in Newfoundland culture. The Devines were poets, writers, scholars, and raconteurs. But John Valentine Devine was a bit of a rogue, and that landed him in trouble with his bosses at the paper company in Grand Falls.
He used to miss a few days from work once in a while, or come in late and so forth. And the manager there and his assistant finally got fed up with it and fired him. So he was naturally disappointed, and he went home and thought about it. And a few days later, he started to write the song, The Badger Drive.
Billy Dorothy, he is the manager, and he's a good man at his trade.
And in this song, he wrote it particularly directed at the directors of the company and praised them of what a wonderful job they're doing in running the company and so forth.
For Ronald is boss on the river, and I'll tell you he's a man that's alive.
When these men heard it, they called him up and hired him back. John Valentine Devine.
And long may the business be managed by Mr. Dorothy and Mr. Cole.
Other family members wrote poetry and songs as well. John Martin Devine is remembered for Pat Murphy's Meadow, but he's best known for The Big Six, an influential radio program named after the family retail and clothing store. The show ran from the mid-30s to 1974.
Everybody didn't have a radio. So some of their friends used to go to the person who had a radio, and I'm talking about the outports all over Newfoundland. They'd gather on a Thursday night at 9 o'clock to listen to the Big Six program, and on a Saturday morning at 9:30, and they'd come into somebody's kitchen and listen to the music. They wouldn't miss it.
There was a wild colonial boy, Jack Duggan was his name.
Big Six would be on, and somebody'd sing a song. Like, I remember in particular one song was The Wild Colonial Boy. Well, my Aunt Lil knew another version of it where, The Wild Colonial Boy wasn't Jack Duggan, he was Jim Doolan or something like that. So there'd be big arguments start up.
Somewhere in Ireland.
The Big Six broadcast mostly McNulty recordings. Peter, Eileen, and Ma McNulty were Irish-American.
I think that the fact that the McNulty family sang all these records was very instrumental in a lot of Newfoundlanders, young and old, who took a great interest in the Irish songs and even went out and bought an accordion or a banjo and listened to them and got the records home, learned the words and all that, and sang the songs and became very involved with music.
Dad was telling me last week that John White, who was a beloved singer locally, used to go down to the Big Six once a week, every week, to ask if any new McNulty family records had arrived. And then he would show him any new ones, and he would buy them and take them home and learn them.
Several local singers recorded McNulty tunes. The McNultys returned the compliment.
Dear Mr. Devine, I have just received your song When I Mowed Pat Murphy's Meadow in the Sunny Long Ago. I am delighted with it. It is lovely and indeed is a typical McNulty number. Thanks a million. Best wishes, Anne McNulty. And then so they did go on to actually record the song.
When I mowed Pat Murphy's meadow in the sunny long ago.
And of course, we were delighted with this, and I mean, because it's a beloved melody. It's so unique. I see the blue of ocean, the distant sail afar, as the maiden in the meadow strikes up dark Loch Nagar. There was music soft and tender in winds that whispered low, as I mowed Pat Murphy's meadow in the sunny long ago.
There are hundreds of people across Newfoundland who share the same commitment, a commitment to this province. They keep it every day by providing reliable service to over 170,000 customers, including their own families, their own friends, in their own communities. From the Port-au-Port Peninsula to the southern shore, they're noticed most when they're needed most. They are part of a tradition of service. They are Newfoundland Power.
The Pontiac Sunfire Coupe now comes with 15-inch wheels, a new 5-speed Getrag transmission, and a 6-speaker CD stereo. The Pontiac Sunfire 2000 value package with a ton of extra features, $188 a month or 1.9% purchase financing. Pontiac Sunfire, built for drivers.
Have you heard about Cohen's 80th anniversary giveaway? $12,000 in prizes, including a cruise. Now you could win either your purchase free, a home office package with hutch, computer, desk, the works, or a cruise for two, including airfare. All you got to do is shop at any one of Cohen's 28 fine stores for your chance to win.
Cohen's Home Furnishings, serving the people of Newfoundland and Labrador for 80 years. Proud to be a sponsor of tonight's program.
Hi, I've got a parcel and a few letters here. Do you deliver as far as Inuvik? Yes, we sure do.
From east to west and north to south.
43 million daily deliveries.
There's no company that covers as much ground in this country.
12 million addresses.
And delivers to as many places.
10 million square kilometers.
As Canada Post.
All right, it's on its way. Well, that was easy.
We're in business to serve. Canada Post.
History as former Premier Alderdice greets the Royal Commissioners arriving from England.
I think there were two major things that happened to us, two huge blows, if you want to talk about the psyche of a people. The first blow was when we gave up responsible government. That was a blow. I don't think Confederation with Canada or anything comes close to, being such a serious wound as that was. And the second one was the moratorium.
In 1934, the moratorium was half a century away. Newfoundland returned to British rule that year, and a new sound came to the airwaves.
The R&B Mellon was the name of a boat, a fictional boat, that traveled all over the world with this crew of very musical, very funny, very handy fellas, Newfoundlanders. And if you think of the date that they started, January 1934, this was just 1 month before the Newfoundland government essentially collapsed. There was a huge malaise, a political and cultural malaise in Newfoundland in 1934. Well, these guys came along and suddenly, they weren't saying anything political, but they were certainly saying, well, we're Newfoundlanders. We can keep up with the rest of the world in the most modern of media, radio. So they really were giving voice to people's feelings of pride at a time when they really needed it.
Oh, this is the place where the fishermen gather in oilskins and boots and cape-hands battened down. All sizes of figures with squid lines and jiggers, they congregate here on the squid jigging ground.
And what happened in 1941 was this was after the Americans had come to St. John's and started building up Pepperell. And everybody who could stand on 2 feet was able to get a job with the Americans down there. So one by one, the boys dropped out and they went to work at Pepperell where they couldn't afford the time to rehearse, they couldn't afford the time to be on the show. Newfoundland had really changed. There was a huge amount of optimism about the country by 1941.
The Americans romanced Newfoundlanders with more than jobs and cash. Their music was slick and glamorous. Stations on the military bases pumped out jazz and country. People all over the province began tuning into country radio like WWVA, Wheeling, West Virginia. Local programs began to broadcast country music as well.
Radio had no competitor. Radio was the only electronic medium then. And if you were on radio, you were big time.
Jimmy Liniger became a star through the Great Eastern Oil Bargain Hour. Starting in 1952, you could hear the Kid Ranger throughout the week. In the spring and summer, Jimmy toured the outports. People often carried chairs from home to their school or parish halls to see Newfoundland's first Western star.
I didn't really have any complaints about not doing traditional music back then. I think back then people who played the button accordion and everything must have thought of themselves as second-class citizens. They looked up to anybody. They looked up to anybody who came from St. John's. We were just the same as we treat somebody who comes from the States.
One for the money, two for the show. You get ready now, go get it, but don't you double up.
Elvis Presley had just taken off. Not from Cape Canaveral, but from wherever he was. He just took off just like one of those rockets. Bang. Elvis was everywhere. And when I spoke to Mr. McDonald at the Great Eastern Oil and Import Company, he decided that people were looking for other kinds of music now and that perhaps it was time to play records on the Bargain Hour program. All the kids were asking for Elvis music, for rock and roll music, and I wasn't playing that, so I was sort of allowed to fade off into the sunset. Everything changed.
I think we felt swept along with the rest of the world for the first time. We actually felt that we were part of something much bigger than just our little tiny, isolated little island.
Crazy stuff, she looks so tough.
Young Newfoundlanders were more than observers. The Ravens, the Ducats, the Dumonts, the Bel Airs, and other bands performed for dances around the province. You couldn't find an accordion anywhere when these guys rocked the stage.
I personally was not much interested in the music of my parents. That's a natural thing. It's like, every generation reviles or rejects the music of their parents. I grew up basically, a rock and roll fan, rock and roll, rhythm and blues. That was what interested me, not the Squid Jigging Ground or the Gerald S. Doyle songbook or any of that stuff. That was Mom and Dad's old stuff. I certainly didn't want to play it, and I wasn't interested in listening to it.
Traditional music was still around, but it was mostly relegated to the kitchen, where it was thought to belong. Radio stations were programming rock and roll and country. Then, in 1955, an Icelandic Canadian arrived from Manitoba. Omar Blondell, also known as Sagebrush Sam, landed a job at VOCM as soon as he got to St. John's.
Went in there and told the station manager that he was, a singer and so on. And the station manager stepped out of the office for a moment and came back with this book, which was the Doyle collection, the third edition, which had just come out. Showed it to him and said, can you sing any of these? And he looked there and he'd never seen any of them. And but he could read music and he read through them and he was really enchanted, taken with this stuff.
And look, he's both got a fine for cutty, aha, me boys. Look, he's both got a fine for cutty, and every seam it is chinked with putty, aha. Falla, me riddle I pay.
He was the first person to do Newfoundland songs on the radio with a guitar accompaniment. And he eventually, ultimately recorded, I think, there were 75 songs in that third edition of Doyle, the 55 edition. He recorded 50 of those songs.
As we walked on the sands at the close of the day, I thought of me wife who was back in Torbay. I knew that she'd kill me if only she knew I was courting a lassie in Harbour Lagoo.
The 50s was a time when, in many ways, there was a lot of pressure to move away from the past. There was a lot of mainland culture coming in, and that was what was popular. And here was somebody who was coming from outside and embracing local culture and giving it a lot of prominence.
You may talk of Clare and Nolan's Ball or anything you choose, but
one of Omar's 45s featured an accordion player from Conception Harbor. Wilf Doyle's sound caught the attention of the record company owner.
He just couldn't describe the sound. He said there's a new music. He said, George Taylor said there's, he was Scotch, and he knows Scotch music, he knows Irish music, and he knew the difference in the music. But he said, there's a new music. He said, that's a different, it's not Irish, it's not Scotch. He said, what is it? I said, it's Newfoundland music. First record I cut was the Jigs and Reels of Newfoundland. That was recorded in '56. That went on for years as an LP. They're still in the store, still being sold.
Wilf Doyle was one of the first Newfoundlanders to make a commercial recording. He traveled the province with his band through the 1940s, 50s, and 60s, playing the old-time music. And he constantly promoted Newfoundland music on the radio.
So I said, if I keep my name on the radio long enough, when anyone will think of music, they'll think of Wilf Doyle. So it worked.
I go by the principles, and I go by the sails, I go by the catch the fish and take some home the line. It's All Around the Circle with Carol Brothers, Evan Purchase, Ray Walsh.
Doug Late was one of the hosts, and Doug was telling me one time that he was into a store up on Gulf Avenue somewhere, buying something, and the girl behind the counter looked at him and said, "You be John White?" And he said, "I beg your pardon." She said, "You be John White?" And finally, what she was saying was, "You be's on John White." Because the show, in many places, the show was John White.
I'm a young married man and I'm tired of me life. 10 years I've been wed to a pale, sickly wife. She has nothing to do, only sit down and cry, praying to God she would die.
There were a number of people involved in a radio show at CBC called Saturday Night Jamboree. We simply were told that CBC was coming here. They would be looking for a group to do a show featuring Newfoundland Irish traditional type music. And we were given the opportunity to do that in October of '64.
This is the CBC Television Network.
And to get us in a happy mood, Ray Walsh with his button accordion and a medley of Newfoundland favorites.
We had to give our people a sense of our worth. We are worth something. We do have our own culture, our own talent, our own accents. And we needed something like that desperately to combat this flood of Canadian material and Canadian talent that was coming into us at that time.
The local programs gave Newfoundlanders a chance to see for themselves the first time a lot of the artists that they'd heard about for years on radio, but couldn't put a face to. And it also brought a lot of new talent out into the open, which never had a chance to get exposure before.
But it was really important when people in the smaller communities saw the traditional singers on television, and the traditional fiddle players and the traditional accordion players, and because all of a sudden that put them up on an equal footing with Elvis Presley or whoever else was competing for time. And I think All Around the Circle had a tremendous influence there, especially because of John White.
I bought her a bottle, and just for to try, the way that she drank it, I thought she would die. I bought her another, but it vanished the same, and then she took Codliver Island the Brain.
So many of the songs that John sang were either traditional songs of Johnny Burke or songs that had been out of the Gerald S. Doyle songbook, or they were McNulty songs, and John kept that alive.
Far away in Australia, soon we'll fade behind. Then I'll be ready to welcome the last, the girl I left behind.
Circle made Skinny White a star, but it was his ability to dissolve the barrier between himself and television viewers that made him so popular. That and his love for Irish and Newfoundland songs.
He was one of the guys who were on TV when we were small children. My parents were fans. He was a professional. He was a TV personality. He was one of Newfoundland's first genuine celebrities.
I ponder on those days gone by as I sat beside the mill.
John sang all the time, whether he was paid or not. He sang on the concert stage, for political rallies, and for small children at family gatherings. Nothing could stop John singing.
His funeral was rather unique because he sang at his own funeral. He had arranged to have 2 of his songs played at his own funeral. So he sang for the entrance to the church, and he sang for the dismissal at the end.
Oh, how I long for those bright days to come again once more. But come again, they never will, for now I'm 64. For now I'm 64.
In the 1950s and 60s, Newfoundlanders began packing up and heading here to Toronto, looking for a better life. Harry Hibbs was one of them. Little did he know that chance would make him a celebrity with his little red button accordion and his salt and pepper hat.
The sun was shining the night that we parted. I held you and kissed you and called you my own. In words sweet and tender, you said that you'd love me and that you'd return when roses bloom.
I recall being in the end of Toronto where the Caribou Club was going on, and I drove down to the corner of college in Bathurst and heard the accordion music and went upstairs, and there was a place called the Caribou Club with Newfoundlanders and Newfoundland food and Newfoundland music, and it was like going back, as someone said, to the Rock.
The atmosphere was great because it was mostly at the time people that had just come from the island, people that were laid off either in the mines, a lot of Bell Islanders, and a lot of other Newfoundlanders looking for work in Toronto because at the time things were booming here. But they wanted a part of home, and it reminded them of home.
The grabbing thing about it was Harry Hibbs, his music and his persona. He had a certain quality both in his demeanor and certainly in his music and his vocals that made you want to listen to him right away. He had a plaintive sound. I guess we call it a folk song. It was sort of a combination of
the call from the minaret and some ancient Irish Celtic air.
I wish in bed. I wish I were a child again.
Harry had a voice that went back before his time, really. He sang from the heart. And when he sang a song, it would get to you.
On an ivy tree.
I have country folk type, Newfoundland, Irish, I don't know. But it worked.
And smiling on its daddy's knee.
Some sing with a guitar, some sing with accordion, some sing with piano. He sang with the accordion, and it was new to the music business at that time.
Green grass grown over me.
This shy Bell Islander's career was launched. After just 6 months at the Caribou Club, he recorded a gold record. His popular television show aired in Ontario for 7 years.
Her mother said.
And when Harry Hibbs toured, he performed for sellout crowds all over the country.
I mean, when we first hit Newfoundland with that music, we were totally astonished by it. Not far from Port aux Basques, there's a little town there, Chicknick Lodge, I think it was called. And we did this dance there. And we were on the stage, and the people are dancing stone. And where you could see the floor had to be going like this back and forth because the curtains were going like this on the wall. And we thought it was the weirdest thing. But that's everywhere we went, we had the same kind of response, and it was just wonderful.
A lot of Newfoundlanders, whether they liked what Harry Hibbs was playing or whether they didn't, they all flocked to where he was playing because the music brought Newfoundland to us. Newfoundland now, it's gone past the boundaries of the island, you know. There's lots of fish and brews being consumed right here in the city of Toronto, and I think when people, you know, have their Newfie music on and have their Newfie meals, in a way they're kind of like reliving Newfoundland again.
Toronto isn't the only destination for Newfoundlanders. In fact, there are so many expatriates in Brampton today that major supermarkets stock Purity products. But there's a hunger for more than just hardtack and jam jams. And that's why the excitement is so high at the Rosetown Inn when Newfoundland musicians are on stage.
Come gather all around me and I'll sing to you a tale about the boys at Carmenville who all walked on the jail. After on another midnight when all hands were asleep, we crept up over Joe Johnson and we stole that barley sheep. Now if you pay attention, I know one thing gonna happen. We never went in to steal the sheep, we went to steal the calf. The old cow, she got angry because we woke her from her sleep. We couldn't take any chances, so we had to steal the sheep.
I don't even get tired of singing it because I know the people are enjoying it, you know. But even now, I'm getting a different crowd now. Like when I go play a club now, I'm getting their kids, you know, and they'll come and say, if they get a tape from me or something, will you sign that for my mother and father? And I know it's for them, but they won't say it, you know. So maybe I'll last another generation after this one, you never know. You know.
Raise your glass and drink with me to that island in the sea, where French means a word they understand. You will never be alone when you're in a Newfie zone. There's the price tag on the doors in the found land.
Roy Payne is one of many Newfoundland musicians who built a career in Toronto. He mixes the country twang with down-home themes. Some dismiss this as simple, sentimental music, but it reflects the longing and frustration of expatriates everywhere.
Now I know that we don't talk like you mainlanders. Hey, I know that we're the victims of your jokes. And I know that you
all think we're goofy newfies, and we all belong in dory boats.
There's a lot of young writers out there, and they're writing the same old thing that's held us all together ever since we come up here. We want to go home, you know. Mama's home, you know, mama songs. Songs about the state of the fisheries back home. It's their heritage what they're writing about.
When the little boats go out to sea from the shores of Newfoundland.
The further you're from home, the more precious home is, and memories and like.
Hey, and the fury of the sea.
I go home every night in my mind. That's one of the good points about not being too sane. You can go home anytime you close your eyes. When I write a song, I go home.
Yes, those little boats of Newfoundland, Lord, made the world of me. Thank you.
In my memory, I will always see the town that I have loved so well.
We come October '68, and we were going across the Gander. I thought I was in Siberia, because all I could see was rocks and trees and nothing. I mean, it was wild experience. And then everybody was talking, and I said, you know, to the taxi driver, I said, what part of Ireland are you from? Oh, he said, no, I'm not. I said, I'm from up the southern shore. I said, no, you know, he kicked me out. But the accents were so similar to ours. It was kind of, we endeared ourselves to one another.
There was music there in the dairy air, like a language that we all could understand.
In the late 60s, early 70s, the traveling Irish bands started to come through. The Irish Rovers, Sons of Erin, Ryan's Fancy. With their arrival here in Newfoundland and their popularity in the pubs and in the clubs, you know, the Strand Lounge was, you know, was the place, you know, in the early 70s. And the traveling Irish groups were hugely successful and popular. And all of a sudden, the music that was always here was being popularized by the traveling groups.
On St. Patrick's Day, the 17th, from New York we set sail.
I heard about Newfoundland when I got to Toronto. I didn't know anything about Newfoundland in Ireland. But the actual mention of the place I heard in a song, and I really liked the story of the song, and I started to learn it.
We pray that God might guide us and keep us by his hand, and send kind waves and pleasant gales bound down for Newfoundland.
We were playing around the scene in Toronto and Ontario, travelling around. We used to go up to Thunder Bay and Sudbury and places like that. But when I got to the Strand Lounge and we started singing, within 3 or 4 days of us playing there, we were playing Monday to Saturday, and by Wednesday night, I mean, the place was full, and people were singing along to most of the songs that they were singing. And this really impressed me, that the music is so popular in this part of the world.
Way, hey, up she rises, away, hey, up she rises, way, hey, up she rises, early in the morning. Give him the hair of the dog that bit him, give him the hair of the dog that bit him, give him the hair of the dog that bit him, early in the morning. Way, hey, up she rises, away, hey, up she rises, way, hey, up she rises, early in the morning.
We play in Gander, we play in Clarendonville, we play in some of the more out-of-the-way places, you know, and this led us to learn a lot about Newfoundland and about the different places, you know, and the songs made sense to us. You know, you'd be talking about Fogo, Twillingate, Morton's Harbour, and wow, here we are in Fogo.
Players, singers, and storytellers from all over the province appeared on the Ryan's Fancy Show. They traveled across Labrador for Songs of the Hunt. They boarded the Norma and Gladys for Songs of the Sea. Ryan's Fancy brought music from the kitchens of Newfoundland to the living rooms of the nation.
Oh, at 6 o'clock in the morning, the sail we will unlock. From that to Siglin Hill, for to Root and toss to Bog. And on our way to Siglin Hill, I met with a comely fair, and I knew she was enticing by the curling of her hair.
The purest traditional music, the a cappella singing, you know, only the die-hard purists can really stand a few verses of a 200-verse song. That's why the marriage of Ryan's Fancy and the traditional singers was a good one, because Ryan's Fancy, I suppose, had the finesse, the slickness that made it appealing to a national audience. And in there, in the heart of it, though, was the traditional music, the pure traditional music, with the people that had learned the music from their fathers or their grandfathers. One of the first shows that we did on location with Ryan's Fancy was in Southeast Bight, Placentia Bay. I guess it would be in 1975. And to get to Southeast Bight, we had to travel by boat. And the skipper of one of the boats was a gentleman named Mac Masters.
Can we have Mac Masters to give us a little song? Come over here, Mac. Sit down.
As the night progressed, Mac Masters got up and sang a song that I recall, the title being Lovely Nancy.
Well, now, Sir Jack and I adventured to pull that string from Nancy's window. Oh, Jack went there and pulled the string. She come down, she let him in. Fall the little arrow, right for the arrow dee.
A number of years later, we had the opportunity of filming in Arnold's Cove in his kitchen, and he performed Lovely Nancy again.
Jack spent that night with a lovely Nancy, and he tickled her just to her fancy. He stayed with her all that long night till it broke in the broad daylight. Fall down, little arrow, right for the arrow tree.
I remember really liking the song and wanting to record it, but obviously to make it work on the record, rather than doing it just as an unaccompanied song the way he did, we kept the style of it, we kept the tempo and all the way he sang it, but added instruments.
Now when that squire came to remember about that string from Nancy's window, the squire went there to pull the string, but by Jack, sure he had it pulled in. Pull it all, little arrow, right, pull it there all day.
I recently was listening to the Punters album. By golly, there it is. The Punters again have another version of that same old song. I think that they trace it back at least to Ryan's Fancy, if not to Mac Masters.
Well, Jack got married to a lovely Nancy, and he dressed her up in silk and fancy. I wish them joy throughout their life, Jack and his beloved wife. All little arrow, right for the arrow. Break it down.
I think the day will come when they'll be glad to have those old Newfoundland songs and whatnot about saying one thing and another. And I do hope. I hope they'll be there for them to get.
Ball it all, little arrow, right for the dillo. Ball it all, little arrow, right for the dillo.
I'd be very happy when I was going if I thought that someone had my songs to use them and to sing them when I'm dead and gone.
of ladies, and still not that old. She's just gray at the edges, but years do take toll. But she's just as good, boys, as she used to be. Many long years ago, you can take it from me. And her strides got that rhythm so dark and so bold, it's like primitive thunder, 7 centuries rolled. And lots of good riders, lots of good men, who have stood up beside her, would stand up, they would stand up again. They would stand up again, just to see she's the grandest of ladies.
Hello, I'm Ingrid Fraser. For hundreds of years, traditional music flourished in the bays and inlets that serrate our coast. Settlers from England, Ireland, Scotland, and France carried their old songs across the sea. These immigrants composed new music that reflected life in their chosen land. The mid-part of this century saw the rise of rock and roll and country. For most young urban Newfoundlanders, traditional tunes belonged to their parents. They worshiped John Lennon, not John White. And they didn't even know about the rich musical heritage that existed here. Tonight, on the conclusion of our story of Newfoundland music, a group of young people go back to the Bay, rediscover songs as ancient, wild, and beautiful as this land, and take them to the world stage.
The early 70s and mid-70s saw a tremendous resurgence of interest in Newfoundland culture and in taking pride in being a Newfoundlander. And that's when Codco came into being, and a lot of visual artists were being recognized, and musicians as well. It was a very important time. I guess you could say it was the Renaissance era for Newfoundland culture.
And I'm speaking for culture.
When Newfoundland was kind of bursting at the seams, trying to find an identity that wasn't, you know, little Newfies kind of thing, you know, and cute little, you know, folkloric things. We were struggling to try and find our voice, and it was really, really strong.
Newfoundland, Canada's happy province.
There was a sense that Confederation 1949 was day one in Newfoundland, and everything that came before was negative and bad, and the bad old days and so on. And after 20 years of that, I think people began to realize that maybe everything that came before wasn't that bad. Maybe what the intervening 20 years weren't that good either.
Oh, but you know, it's not just an idea, it's a reality. Yes.
You had the LSP Hall thriving, you had you know, the Mummers, you had Codco, you had so much going on in theater and music as well that did not rely on outside influences. It was ours.
There was a vibe, there was a sense. It seemed to me there was an intellectual underground that was just, you know, really coming up to the surface, and it was exciting, it was strong, it was, you know, really heady times.
Down, down from your mountain of ego, where sorrow was never before.
During the Cultural Renaissance, a group of young urban musicians were rethinking their place in Canada and the world. They were searching for a way to express who they were and where they came from. Two seminal figures, both obsessed with Newfoundland culture, led the way. Neil Murray was a Rhodes Scholar and journalist. He had an eclectic collection of international music. Neil encouraged musicians to perform Newfoundland folk songs, and he introduced a young audience to traditional music through his radio show, Jig's dinner. Noel Dinn was a musician. He would go on to form the trad rock band Figgy Duff.
Noel was a real corner boy, townie, and hadn't really ever experienced Newfoundland music, you know, by living in a community where it went on, kind of thing. So we all became friends, and various kinds of bands sprang up.
The Philadelphia Cream Cheese Band was essentially a rhythm and blues band. Laverne Squires would come out for certain gigs, and she started doing folk songs, and amongst those folk songs were some Newfoundland folk songs. I remember in particular a song called Who Was at My Window Weeping.
Laverne Squires learned some traditional songs from private music teachers and at high school in St. John's. In the mid-60s, Neil Murray introduced her to the great folk song collections. That's when her passion for traditional music blossomed.
I was studying music with Eileen Stanbury at the time, and I met Neil Murray, and he had this gorgeous array of books, you know, and music galore, and he wanted me to sing them. I like the poetry, say, first. Then I said, well, if the poetry is there, the melody's got to be gorgeous. And it was. 'Twas on one day and a high holiday, the high day in the year, Lord Donnell himself, he went to church, some holy words to hear, some holy words to hear.
Noel Dinn hadn't realized traditional Newfoundland ballads existed until he heard Laverne Squires sing some. And when Laverne introduced Noel to Neil Murray, a relationship grew that was to give birth to an all-consuming mission.
Neil always had a total fascination with anything Newfoundland and was a real nationalist, and had he'd known a lot of the Newfoundland song collections and so on that had gone on. We hadn't really seen them at this point because no one sort of brought that kind of stuff up in school or anything. So I remember Neil showing us all the Maud Karpeles collection, the Peacock collection, and the Greenleaf and Mansfield collection, looking at the songs from there. Not to mention that he spent every cent he had getting Figgy Duff off the ground.
I have a distinct memory of being out at Neil's house out in Murray's Pond one night, probably sometime in 1969. And Noel must have been there, Laverne was probably there. He played this record for us. It was a Fairport Convention album called Legion Leaf.
A holiday, and the first month of the year, Lord Donnell's wife came into the church, the gospel for to hear.
Hearing Fairport really was quite an eye-opener. It became a model, a blueprint of like, okay, so that's how you can do these songs. That's how you can be a rock and roll band and play traditional folk songs. I would suspect that the seed was planted right then and there that became Figgy Duff and everything that ensued.
But in 1969, putting together a Newfoundland trad rock band was well down the road. The Philadelphia Cream Cheese Band split up, and Noel and Laverne formed the psychedelic group Land of Mordor. Then came Lukey's Boat. They were considered an acid rock band, but they managed to throw a few Newfoundland folk songs into their repertoire. Then, on the eve of signing a recording contract in England, personal problems tore Lukey's Boat apart.
It just sort of wallowed in the wilderness for a while, but it really came to a head, I guess, in 1975 in January, when we got together, myself and Noel and Jamie Snyder and Phil Dinn, to do a show with Codco at the Arts and Culture Center. We did all traditional music.
Come and I will sing you.
What will you sing me?
I will sing you one love.
What will the one be?
One lived all alone, forevermore shall be. So come and I will sing you.
What will you sing me?
Figgy Duff was born. The band went through several incarnations, including one with Anita Best. By the end of 1975, their lineup was set, with Noel Dinn, his brother Philip, Dave Panting, Kelly Russell, Art Stoyles, and Pamela Morgan.
One lived all alone, forevermore shall be. So.
We wanted to de-ghettoize, I guess, if you can use that word, Newfoundland music. And we wanted people to hear and understand and take pride in the old songs and do them in such a way that younger people would become interested and try and get it out and try and dispel that Newfie myth.
A sailor courted a farmer's daughter who lived convenient to the Isle of Man.
They, in a way, were discovering a culture they didn't know about. You know, they started, in fact, a whole tradition of rock musicians going out into local communities all over this province and meeting people who could sing and then recording them or taking down their songs. And they started a whole new revolution of the wheel of collecting local folk songs. And out of that, one of the best collections of Newfoundland folk songs we have is Genevieve Lear and Anita Best's, Pam Morgan's book called Come and I Will Sing You, which was really based on their field trips as local musicians trying to learn new old songs in the 1970s.
From the Peacock collection, we got the names of the singers and the places they came from and went to the communities. And I can't believe, you know, when I look back on it now, how brazen I was. I mean, because I used to just go up and knock on the door and say, excuse me, does so-and-so live here? Or who's the best singer in this community? And things like that. We went out, you know, looking for these people who sang the songs, and we found them.
In the 18 years they were together, Figgy Duff produced 4 albums. They moved from creating rock arrangements of traditional tunes to writing original material. Figgy Duff raised an awareness of Canadian Celtic music that would open doors for future bands such as the Rankins and Great Big Sea.
Don't have to hide away your
I think Newfoundland owes Noel Dinn a huge debt. I mean, Newfoundland music in particular. I never would have had the determination and drive to keep it up like he did. I was following, and we all were following this, you know, dictator, you know, this leader who just had the strength and perseverance and the vision to make it happen.
Other young musicians were trying their hand at trad rock. Tommy Sexton fronted a Fairport Convention cover band called Rakish Paddy, and there was the savage sound of Red Island.
They were a loud, aggressive trad band who liked to make noise and have fun.
Red Island had a solid following in St. John's, but once they crossed the overpass, it was a different story.
We'd go play these bars out around the bay, and the place would be block solid. And after the first set was over, there'd be about 20 people left in the bar. You know, they all get up and leave, and you know, it's like go down the road somewhere. You know, it was like to the other bar where the country band was playing. You know.
You may talk of Clare and Nolan's ball or anything you choose, but it couldn't hold a snug box of the spree at Calagoose.
Figgy Duff and Red Island may have had trouble gaining a following in rural Newfoundland, but the reverse is certainly true for the wonderful Grand Band.
Sarah, birch, rind, tart, wine, cherry wine, and turpentine, jowls, and cavalances, ginger beer and tea. Pig's feet, cat's meat, dumpling full of sheet, dandelion, and cracky soup of the Calagoose worry.
I don't think we ever had an unsuccessful booking. Humor played a big part in it, and the fact that we didn't take anything too seriously, and it was a rocking good band. You know, you could dance to it, and you could tap your feet to it, and you could sing along with it. It was a show as opposed to a band in a bar.
I remember being in Toronto and getting the call from Sandy saying, you know, we're going to try and write a TV show with Greg and Mary, and do you want to come home and work on it? And we'll get a band together and we'll have a show.
The Root Cellar was a kind of mythical burr or club run by Mr. and Mrs. Budgell, Greg Malone and Mary Walsh. We were the house band for the TV shows, and for the duration of that show, we were dubbed the Wonderful Grand Band.
Lots of fishing down at this harbor, lots of fish running around here. Boys and girls are fishing together, 45 from Carbonear. Catch a hold this one, catch a hold that one, swing around this one, swing around she. Dance around this one, dance around that one, diddle on this one, diddle on me.
Once the shows were taped and over with, well, we had put in so much time and had by now, you know, a fairly decent repertoire of Newfoundland fiddle tunes and Ron Hines songs. So we decided we might as well continue on.
In the second year, our ratings were in the neighborhood of 235,000 viewers a week. In a province with a population of about 500,000, that's a very, very respectable number. As a matter of fact, I don't think there's probably ever been a number that would come anywhere near that.
Well, I mean, we were lucky to grow up in a period when the Wonderful Grand Band, to give them all the credit that's due, was on TV, and they were playing Newfoundland music in a really commercial form, you know, that stood up with the Troopers and April Wines that were being played on the radio stations. So you had this wicked positive reinforcement of Newfoundland music.
By the late 1970s, young trad rock bands were traveling Canada, Europe, and the United States. Although some older singers and players began to appear at folk festivals, most stayed in their kitchens and carried on a more private, community tradition. But three became beloved mentors.
Rufus Ginchard is a very important person in the Newfoundland music scene. Fiddle playing kind of died out in Newfoundland throughout the 1950s and 60s. Prior to that, I mean, a lot of people played fiddle, played accordion. This was the form of entertainment years ago. But when rock and roll music came in and country music came in and radio and television and all these different influences, people tended to cast off their fiddles and accordions, didn't play anymore. And there's a few key people, such as Rufus, who kept playing through that time. You had younger people like myself, you know, around about 1975 or so, who were interested in learning the Newfoundland music. Well, who could you learn it from? There were no recordings made of a lot of these musicians. So someone like Rufus, who's, you know, at least 2 generations older than me, that was a gold mine for me. If he had quit playing, you know, that source of music just wouldn't have been there.
Great, got it.
Well, sir, I know his tunes is over 100 years old. If I only played them, I learned them from my uncles, my old uncles, you know. They could play the violin. See? Old Uncle John Peter Payne used to play the violin, and that's where I learned his tunes, and he learned them from his old uncles. From his old uncles, now. That goes back a long way, sir. I don't know how far back past 100 years, but a good ways.
I used to see him somewhat as a representative of that generation of Newfoundlanders who were really the keepers of our cultural heritage, you know, in his case particularly the music. But I mean, there were people in all these communities who kept like the tunes, the dances, the stories, and the songs. These people, they weren't recorded in the history books. We never learned about them in school.
Emile Benoit was the other great influence for me, and he, completely different than Rufus. His repertoire tunes was entirely different. Emile composed a lot of his own music. Also a man who loved a lot of fun and loved to play music and entertain people. Dance around, he'd get up to all kinds of antics, you know, playing the fiddle and on his back. I saw him actually do a somersault one time and land back on his feet, and he never missed a note of the tune. It was amazing.
I just loved his spirit. It was absolutely infectious. You couldn't be in his company without catching some of the joy.
Emile's career was remarkably like Rufus Ginshard's. The fiddler gained prominence in his 60s. He made lasting friendships with Kelly Russell, Christina Smith, Pamela Morgan, and other young musicians. Emile took his music to Europe, across Canada, and into the United States.
Emile's such a showman, and that whole connection between the French culture here and the French culture there was, for Emile, it was just like being home. It was you know, so close to what he'd grown up with and the kind of situation he'd play in on the Port-au-Port Peninsula, that it was really a trip, and people loved him there. They just, you know, identified with him right away and had friends, and, you know, you couldn't get him out of there.
Come on, man, be real. Get some lyrics.
Some of the tunes he had were, you know, bits and pieces of traditional tunes that he would put together and he'd put his own name on it. But there were other tunes that I've never heard anything like it anywhere, wherever they came from. Just the music in the man was incredible.
Mais moi je n'écouterai pas vivre la rose d'Amérique.
Rufus had passed away, and then a little while after that, Emile passed away. And I remember Minnie White saying to me, I'm the next one in line, you know. And I think what she really meant, not so much that she was going to be the next one to die, but that it was, Emile and Rufus were icons, had become almost legends in their own time in Newfoundland as instrumental performers. And so had Minnie.
I was 8 years old, that's when I was in Bales Ferry, St. Albans. I got interested in accordion on account my father used to play the accordion. And I liked the accordion. I liked all kinds of music then, but I seemed to take the accordion more so than anything else. I didn't think I could play very good, but they asked me to go to a club that started down here called the Starlight Lounge. One Sunday. I went down that Sunday, and I will guarantee you I've never so sorry in all my life. Going down for a few people was going to be there, and there was about 300 blocked the place. And here I never got on the bandstand before. I had to face it. Now you can picture what I got like. I had my stomach full of butterflies. As soon as we started to play, the people blocked the floor. Well, that was a little bit of encouragement. I figured that when they're not going to look at me, they're dancing. I went back the next Sunday, and I ended up there 13 years.
It was quite different, because here's a woman that you had a hard job to get out of the kitchen and convinced that she really do play well. And then to go into a club, and there she is being the boss of the band, and they frightened the death of her. They better not screw up. She fronted the band, she called the shots on what she wanted to play, she wrote her own music. Oh yeah, that was something else. There used to be always a joke, you know, what's the definition of a gentleman? A fellow who can play accordion but one. You know, what's the difference between a button accordion and a piano accordion? Piano accordion burn longer. These sort of things, right? Well, Minnie White, I think, and from Ange them, it took the stigma away now. I think she put some recognition back into accordion players, some respectability back into accordion players.
I often said, there's accordion players in Newfoundland, women, plays behind the doors. If they got out, they'd probably do the same as I done. Once you make up your mind to go, because I know it got to be a good new accordion players. Got to be some women out there. And they're not showing up, see? But I was brave enough to see if I can go.
In the mid-1960s, the news rang out clear. Pack your bags out of your nets, you must get out of here. Take your picks out of your shovels, your rakes out of your holes. The government says you must pack up and go.
We said that if we could marry the essence of the kitchen parties in Irishtown with the wonderful music that was being done by the popular Irish groups, and then add some new songs into that mix, that maybe other people might find that as exciting a prospect as we did.
They sailed out from St. Leonard's and out from Toslow. They steamed across the bay with their houses in tow, with their beds in the bow, their stoves in the stern, on the way with their sons and their daughters, on the way with their sons and their daughters, on the way with their sons and their daughters.
For us, initially, I mean, no one knew who the hell the Irish Descendants were, but we had sense enough to you know, write the record companies, and fortunate enough to meet Sam, the record man, and when we did finally get an opportunity to play in front of these people, the crowd were out, and it was exciting times, and we excited those people, and subsequently we built relationships on that.
In the merry month of June, when from me home I started, left the girls in tune, so sad and broken hearted, saluted father dear.
You know, I became familiar, acquainted with the O'Briens and the Irish Descendants, and a fella called Coolan, who's retired now, was head of Warner Brothers, and he wanted to sign this group very, very much. I said, well, you know, I'm not quite sure. I said, you know, I'm going to St. John's, you know, we're going to have East Coast music and such like. And we'll get a hold of O'Brien's boat, which is in Bay Bulls, you know. And we'll get everybody on the boat, and they won't get off the boat until I sign the contract. Well, that's what happened, believe it or not. You know, it's so far-fetched when you think about it. But that was the first time that an artist from Newfoundland had been signed by a multinational company. And I think that's sort of a landmark. And of course, that same company signed Big C, and all these things are doing well.
And the winner is the Irish Descendants. Yeah!
For us, things like the East Coast Music Awards aside, are great. It's wonderful to win them, but that sort of thing is a very important tool for anybody who's building a career in the music business.
Tell you what, I'll give you a deal. What? $20, you can have a CD, no problem.
Everybody says, oh, East Coast music. You know, it's great. Where was it? Well, it's always been there. You know, this talent has always existed. In the last 10 or 20 years is when the record companies found out that they could make money out of it. Suddenly everybody's, oh my God, where's this talent been?
And the winner is...
Great Big C, Lukey,
And I think we should say there's something really amazing about a music scene where a 100-year-old song from Buena Vista Bay can become the video of the year.
I think the biggest thing for down here is the people here in Newfoundland have to realize, as regional as their music is, it's universal.
Great Big Sea is known across Canada for their Newfoundland nationalism as well as their music. That sense of place is a recurrent theme in Newfoundland songs. It's rooted in a love of home that's regional by nature, but universal in its appeal. Whether singing about the beauty of the land, the warmth of the people, or the politics of the day, our songwriters reveal Newfoundland to audiences at home and abroad.
Just to wake up in the morning to the quiet of the cove and hear Aunt Bessie talking to herself.
We're believers that you got to stay, connected to family and to home and to community and to nature. I have to get in the woods. I have to hear the waves on the beach, and I've got to hear the wind blow the leaves, and I got to hear a brook rattle on a regular basis, not just a Sunday afternoon walk. It doesn't do it, doesn't cut it. Almost every day of my life, I have to go and do that.
How can I leave those mornings with the sunrise on the cove and the gulls like flies surrounding Clayton's Wharf? Platter's Island wrapped in rainbow in the evening after fog. The ocean smells are perfume to my soul. Some go to where the buildings reach to meet the clouds, where warm and gentle people turn to swarming faceless crowds. So I'll do without their riches, glamour and the noise, and I'll stay and take my chances with those saltwater joys.
If we're not here, if we're not in Newfoundland, we can't write about what we see, and we can't hear the stories, and we can't talk to the people, and we can't learn the songs from here.
If we're going to do original material, we're going to do it in a traditional type of way, then we're going to write about the things that we care about, things that we know about, which is, of course, our people and our place. And that's what we did.
In 1915, on the 10th day of June, at Burke's Wharf, the Marion lay, prepared for the banks as was custom to do, all loaded with capelin for bait. She's a Fortune Bay schooner heading out for the banks with fine party Fortune Bay men. But some on the quay were rumored to say she'd never be heard from again.
Whenever you're talking about your own culture, your own people, your own place, your own language, your own humor, you've got a pretty broad fabric there to draw from.
'Cause I've seen the mountains, and I've seen the sea. I've seen all that beauty,
and lived a life that was free. The fact that I left Labrador helped to give me that feeling of what I had, something that we, I think, all too often take for granted. The songs are there behind every tree and every rock. It's just a matter of putting it on paper. And it's not difficult to write a song about the big land. Where the wild birds are flying and the caribou roam. Many places I've rambled, but this is my home.
Talk a Clarenolan's ball or anything you choose, but I couldn't hold a snuff box to the spree at Kelligrews.
Newfoundlanders have always been topical in their songwriting, as is almost all traditional music. And they've written about specific events and specific people and times and so on.
And I'll tell you, boys, we had a time at the Kelligrews soiree.
Not just the singing tradition, but I think the songwriting or the song-making tradition is still pretty strong as well.
Well, Crooked Flavin struck the fiddler, so a hand I then took in. You should see George Clooney's beaver hat and it flattened to the rim. And Hogan's coat was like a vest, the tails were gone, you see. Says I, the devil haul ye in your Kelligrews soiree.
John Burke was, in his time, the most successful impresario in St. John's. Year after year, from the 1890s almost till the time he died, he put out books of songs, mostly of his own creation. Songs that may have been out of the whole cloth written by John Burke, or may have been cast as a parody of some other popular song. He'd find something in the news, and then he'd turn it into a song.
As I sit here alone by the fire, many strange fancies my mind often fill. So I said, I strike off a few bars, Maggie, of your dock near the old Southside Hill.
Some of his songs, because they were distributed as these songbooks or as little sheets of what we call broadsides, little sheets of paper, perhaps 5 or 6 inches wide, 12 inches long or so, he'd sell these on the street or hire little boys to sell them. Because they were distributed that way, sometimes they travel long distances. And some of his songs have, in some sense, gone underground for the 60 years or 80 years since he wrote them. And one example of that is the song Harbour Grace Excursion, or Excursion Around the Bay.
Well, it was on this Monday morning and the day been calling fine to the Harbour Grace Excursion with the boys to have a time. And just before the sailor took the gangway from the pier, I saw some fellow haul me wife and boarded a volunteer.
When you're younger, you might have heard a cousin or an uncle sing this song that really stood out in your head, and then you just got to sort of, just prod back and search it out again. And that's indeed what's happened with Excursion Around the Bay, which I remember Gabe Houlihan singing from I was young as 7 years old.
Oh me, oh my, I heard me oh my cry. Oh me, oh my, I think I'm gonna die. Oh me, oh my, I heard me always say, I wish I'd never taken this excursion around the bay. Hey!
In 1967, a young singer-songwriter made his own excursion from the Bay, and Ron Hines would later play Johnny Burke in a stage production called The Bard of Prescott Street. Now regarded as Newfoundland's premier songwriter, Ron polished his skills acting, writing, and singing in the cooperative theater movement of the 1970s and 80s. The new bard had arrived.
To my mind, he follows directly in the tradition of St. John's songwriters that Johnny Burke formed a part of. And Ron is the modern day sort of continuance of that Johnny Burke songwriting tradition, you know.
Sonny lives on a farm, on a far distant place. Take off your shoes, stay out of the lay down your head by the soft river bed. Sonny always
I've always thought that growing up here in this community kind of made me the kind of writer that I am. It colors everything that I do. And you spend years and years and years thinking about it. I'm going to be a songwriter in the music business, and everybody thinking, well, how the hell are you ever going to do that? When you grow up in little tiny communities like this, those kinds of things seem so remote. They seem so impossible.
Sonny, go away. I'm here all alone. Your daddy's a sailor, never comes home. Nights are so long, silence goes on. I'm feeling so tired. God, that's wrong.
I think some of the Ron songs are already traditional Newfoundland music. You know, I think they've been absorbed into not only Newfoundland culture, but in cultures all over the world. It's a phenomenon, if you ask me.
What color is a heartache from a love lost to sea? What shade of memory never fades, lingers to eternity? How dark is the light of day? Sleepless eyes of mine survey. Is that you at my blue? My heart is as cold as you.
It was kind of a day like that day. It was pretty bad, pretty stormy, pretty dark day. And it just all came back to me really early in the morning, and I spent the day at the table writing that lyric. And couldn't sing it for the longest time, couldn't get through it. It was just, it had a really emotional effect upon me, you know. But that's always a great breakthrough for me, just to be able to, like, get past that, you know, to be able to just, like, write about all that stuff. Because I carried it around, like most people, for years and years, the shock of that right now. It's a big moment in the history of Newfoundland, the loss of the Ranger. All those lives.
I lie awake in the morning as the waves wash on the sand. I hold my heart at bay, the lives of his children in my hands. And whose plea will receive no answer? Whose cry is lost? Whose voice so familiar whispers my name as the night comes in, and whose wish never fails to a vacant heart on Valentine's. Is that you? I do. My heart is as cold. My heart is my heart is as cold as you.
There's a quote from Lady Hope Simpson. She said, you know, Newfoundlanders are the only people who had to be chained to heaven because they always want to be going back to their island.
As you.
We've learned to live in this hostile environment of ours, you know. We've learned to love it. We've learned to absolutely accept it into our hearts and defend it with our lives if we had to. But, you know, the place hates us.
When I think of Emile Benoit, I mean, going down to his house and visiting him there, I mean, I'll never be able to do that again, and no one else today will have that opportunity to do that. And these younger musicians will never know that and will never identify these tunes with that man and this place that he lived in and his family and the other people who are around him, because that way of life is gone.
If you just look around,
Newfoundland is the people and the rocks and the trees that are here. And, you know, as long as there's rocks and trees and people here, there's going to be songs.
Traditional music, too, is one of those things that its death has often been reported, you know. As long as there's two Newfoundlanders left on the island, one is a performer and the other one is an audience. So I think the fact that the music isn't homogeneous, the fact that it's always changing, that it's been evolving for 500 years, so you can't say, okay, this is traditional music, now we're going to put it in a museum and we'll all admire it, you know, then it's meaningless. What's allowed this tradition to thrive is the fact that it's kept growing.
To think even that, you know, people will be singing Excursion Around the Bay or Lucas Boat or whatever 2 or 3 generations after we're gone, and we had something to do with, you know, preserving this little slice of Newfoundland folklore, and that's great.
You remember the Jerry Squires painting where all the families on the edge of the cliff and they seem to be looking at something. They're looking at you or whatever, you know. In the back of my brain, there's a whole crowd of singers. I mean, I can't see them as individuals, but I can feel their goodwill. I can feel that they're happy the song is being sung again or something.
I had a dream the other night, lowlands, lowlands away, my John. I had a dream the other night, lowlands away. I dreamt my love came standing by, lowlands, lowlands.